what we should do is live in a society in which everybody respects everybody else, which means everybody either does nothing to anybody else, that is, we don't transact with them, or we transact in ways that do not affect each other's utility at all, or we transact in ways that are positive from the point of view of the persons in question, i.e. by agreement. So our ideal is the completely voluntary society in which everybody's relations to everybody else are based on agreements with the other person, rather than forcing him to do things your way. The big problem with government is, how do you avoid government being an instrument for forcing people to do things the way of somebody else? In our view, that's the big problem, and our political programs are designed to do our best to reduce the incidence of interference in people's lives.
Would we love to ask questions?
Can I get
Absolutely, yes. I mean,
I'd like to get a rebuttal before the question.
Okay.
I think we need a moderator.
Okay.
Why don't you come and sit here, because we'll be fighting also. I think together. and in order to get Jan's unanimity, we'll be actually shooting each other until there is one person left who is unanimous. So
Okay, let's go to Walter, go back to Pierre, and then we'll open it up. How's that?
I have a rebuttal against Pierre, but before I mention that, I want to mention that in 2010 I came out with 4 books. In 2010 I came out with 4 books. In 2009 1, and 2008 1, so I'm 6 for the last 3 years.
but were they readings or actual, or were they reeditions, or come on? Doesn't make sense.
It's sort of like the python that ate the pig, it sort of gets clumped up. None of these books were in the works for many years, and they all just came out in 2010. I didn't write 4 books in 2010.
Very impressive.
I very much disagree with Pierre on this trashing of non-aggression and property rights. I disagree on 2 grounds. First of all, if there was a circular definition, well, that's the way definitions are. They're tautologies. No big deal.
that's just nonsense.
Okay, just a minute.
Second, I wasn't defining one thing in terms of the other. I was just saying that there are 2 sides of the libertarian coin. One side is the non-aggression principle, the other side is how do we get property, because we won't know if it's aggression or not unless we have some sort of property. I appreciate Pierre's point that you have to know what non-aggression is before you get to property, otherwise you'll have homesteading in a violent way or in a confrontational way. But I don't see that as a problem, and I certainly don't accept his skepticism about that. I think that this is the essence of the plumb line libertarianism, and to reject that is to not be a libertarian.
Footnote, it is a problem, and the libertarian idea is middle third is devoted to that.
Jan, it's my turn now. Paul, tell me to shut up. I've made a list of disputes or issues that we as libertarians have differences from everyone else, and I think the 3 or the 4 of us here on this side of the table all agree on all of these things. Well, maybe on the first group. For example, we should not have laws against profiteering. We shouldn't have usury laws. We shouldn't have laws against drugs. Minimum wage is illicit. Imperialism is no good. Rent control is bad. Restricting free trade is no good. Rape, murder is no good. And Sunday closing laws are no good. I think all of us in this room would agree with those. And I think the only way to reconcile those is that none of them violate the non-aggression axiom. And all of them are based on homesteading and legitimate title transfer. So if we eschew these as a compass, we're at sea without a compass. We need a compass. We need some sort of criteria to decide one way or the other. Now, I have another list of issues where libertarians disagree. Intellectual property, unions, abortion, immigration, discrimination, reparations, punishment, yelling fire in a crowded theater, blackmail, and libel. These are very, very tough issues that some libertarians disagree with each other. And I say the only way to make sense of these is to keep those 2 principles in mind, non-aggression and homesteading. And if we just eschew them on this fallacious ground that one is defined in terms of the other, We are at sea without a rudder, without a compass. We have no libertarian theory. Happily, I'm sure all of us in this room, unless there are some people who are not libertarians and are just thinking about it, would come out on the same side of at least the non-debatable issues, maybe not on abortion and some of the rougher ones, but I think the only way to make any sense of those tougher ones is to keep these two rules in mind, and if we jettison these two rules, we have nothing. We have no way to proceed. Now, the second thing that I disagree with Pierre very strongly is his business about fraud, and it's all vague, and nobody can tell anything about anything because, suppose you try to pick up a girl and you don't tell her that you snore at night or whatever it is. Therefore, is it fraud or is it not? Well, this is the very famous continuum problem, and there is no solution to the continuum problem. There is no philosophical solution at all. For example, how close does my fist have to be to Paul before he can take defensive efforts and shoot me? Well, it depends on the context. If I'm using this now in this room with lights and all, and he and I have been friends for 30 years, and I sort of go like that as an example, and he shoots me, well, he's a murderer. That's clear. On the other hand, if it's in a dark alley and I come at him with a pen, he doesn't know if it's a knife or a pen, and he doesn't see too well, and I'm really close, and he shoots me, well, then that's self-defense. Well, where do you draw the line? How close do you have to be? There is no right answer. It depends upon, I don't know what, reasonable men or the context or what a jury says or something like that, or a God's eye view. There is no right answer to that. Let me give you another example. Statutory rape. We know that a 5-year-old girl is incapable of giving consent to sex. We know that a 25-year-old girl or a woman is capable of giving consent to sex. Well, what about a 15-year-old girl or a 14 or a 16? No matter where you put the line, there's always going to be somebody below the line who's more mature than somebody above the line, somebody who's older. There is no right answer to that, and from that, we don't jettison our principles. We just say, well, that's the way the world is, and we got to keep on trucking or whatever, and we have to come up with some sort of reasonable way of dealing with these sort of issues. So this skepticism, I think, is entirely unjust. I think that Jan and I are still at odds over harm. Yes, one way to harm someone is to shoot him. Another way to harm him is to take all his customers away, or to take his wife away. I think Paul's wife is a lovely lady, and I now try to seduce her away from him. And if I succeed, I've harmed Paul in some very important way, maybe even more important than punching him in the shoulder. He'd rather be punched in the shoulder than lose his wife. He was harmed by this, and vice versa with my wife and all that. So I think it's a perfectly legitimate way of talking about harm. Harm is not limited to physical violence. And if you misspeak and say that harm is part of the libertarian principle, well, then you're misspeaking. You're misassessing what libertarianism is.